This is going to be about how the Protestant conservative mindset that many Americans had has been a major problem over the past, especially 100 to 200 years or so in America, and about how traditional Catholicism, or at least the traditional Catholic mindset, is far superior to the Protestant conservative mindset. Now, just to make this clear, this is not going to be political. This is not. I mean, I guess you definitely could apply this to politics in many ways, but it's not necessarily meant to be a political video. This is not necessarily meant to bash anyone who holds a conservative mindset. A lot of political videos nowadays are very heated with one side trying to quote unquote destroy or own the other side. This is not that kind of video. We're just trying to examine the different mindsets that both sides have, both the conservatives and the traditionalists, and kind of see where those mindsets have varied and what results those have produced over the past 100 to 200 years in America, especially. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, and we're mainly going to be talking about America with this video, though I assume that this could also apply to other countries. So America, pretty much from its founding, has been a very Protestant country, firmly. It was founded by Protestants, and Protestants still make up the vast majority of Americans, or I suppose everybody in America identifies as Christian, or many of them do. And even the people who don't identify as Christian, they still have the Protestant mindset. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that many Catholics, especially the New Order Conciliar Catholics, and even especially the traditional Catholics, also kind of tend to have a Protestant mindset in some ways. And we're going to explain what the Protestant mindset is here in a little bit. Okay, so, and traditional Catholics, just so you know, were not really allowed in America. They were in Maryland at first when America was first formed, but they actually wanted, many of the original Protestants wanted to kick them out of Maryland. And originally during the American Revolution in 1776, they were going to outlaw Catholics in America once they won. They didn't want the Catholics to win. However, once the revolutionaries had went and talked to the French government. Since the French government was Catholic, they had to pretend to be nice to Catholics for the meantime in order to get away with that. But even now, if you go into the deep South in America and you say that you're a Catholic, especially in the Bible Belt areas, the Protestants will kind of look at you with horror. I've heard of many find out that you're a Catholic, especially, then they don't like you very much. So what we're going to do here is explain what the differences mainly between the especially the Protestant conservative mindset are, and the traditional Catholic mindset are in religion, especially, and then we're going to explain what that has produced in America, the different kind of physical, tangible results that is produced in our country that are currently causing so many problems. Okay, so first off, in the traditional Catholic mindset, we believe that the whole focus of a person's life is supposed to be trying to become a saint, basically trying to pray to God, grow holier, eliminate any personal defects that we have, increase any virtues that we have, and basically just do anything that can make us more pleasing or appealing to God, basically. And we acknowledge that we can't become perfectly holy on our own without God's intercession. But the idea is that Catholics are kind of supposed to be constantly striving for greater holiness in their lives. They're never stopped. They never say, okay, I'm good enough. I'm going to mass every week. I get to confession every now and then. I pray every now and then. I'm good. I think I'm fine. God will be pleased with me. Nothing is ever quite enough. They always just keep going. They try and keep improving in any way that they can. The Protestant mindset is quite different because the Protestants believe that Jesus died for your sins and you can never be worthy of Jesus' love, which in a certain sense is true. But he has just kind of saved you by dying on the cross and you're good to go. You can't earn heaven. You can't grow holy because nothing can ever be comparable in a certain sense to God's glory. So you can't really earn something that's just so far above and beyond you. That's impossible. I think it was Martin Luther who said that Christians are basically just heaps of dung, but then God covers them with snow and makes them look appealing. So that's kind of the Protestant mindset is, I can't do anything on my own, really. If you strip away all the finery, the Protestant mindset is, I can't do anything on my own. Only God can do this stuff. And so I'm basically helpless without God and I have to rely on God. And that doesn't sound horrible at first glance, but it has caused some problems. And here's the problem with that. The main problem is that the Catholic mindset is always, how can I do more? And they're always trying to constantly come up with new ways to do better. Whereas the Protestant mindset has kind of seeped into over the years, there's nothing I can do. I just have to rely on the higher powers to save me. And I'm going to delve a little deeper into that here shortly. But then the second aspect that we have to get into is the bit about personal interpretation of the Bible. So the Protestants, as we all know, go by sola scriptura. They believe that, faith alone has to save you, or, you can only go by the Bible, so you can't go by what such and such Pope said or what such and such Vatican Council said. The Council of Trent is out. And so on and so forth. You shouldn't, maybe listen to what the saints said or wrote. Any rules that the Catholic Church came up with specifically and laid out, you shouldn't pay attention to those. So they just interpret basically everything on their own. Now, generally speaking, they actually have had some universal agreements throughout time. So, they've all agreed that things like abortion is wrong, gay quote-unquote marriage is wrong, divorce is wrong, murder is wrong, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that when it comes to the finer details, they've actually given themselves quite a bit of leeway. The problem is that they get to interpret, in a certain sense, what is or isn't right or wrong, and nobody else really gets to tell them or step in and say, actually, no, you've misjudged that. That's your interpretation is incorrect here. And that's why you have so many different Protestant denominations that have split out across the U.S. is because none of them agree on pretty much anything. And so what is this all and let's look at the Catholic side now. The Catholic side is quite different. The Catholic Church has already laid out clearly what's right and wrong. You don't get to personally interpret what you think of as being right or wrong. You just have to go with whatever the Catholic Church said. If the Catholic Church says this is good, then you have to abide by it. Doesn't matter whether you don't like the fact that it's good, you got to go with it. Same thing goes for if the Catholic Church says something is bad. You might desperately want it to be A-okay, but if the Catholic Church said it's bad, there's nothing you can do about it. So a good example of this is contraception. The Catholic Church says that contraception is bad. The Catholics don't have any say. They might want to argue or fight as to why contraception should be A-okay, but they don't have any say in it whatsoever. Catholic Church says it's bad, so it's bad. End of discussion. So what has really happened, especially over the past 100 years, and in the 20th century especially, is that once you started having all of these revolutions and modernism started taking over, modernism did in fact take over the Catholic Church, and you can kind of see that with where the conciliar church is today. You've got the Pope being supposedly okay with trans people and gay people and whatnot. But especially when you come to the traditional Catholic side, you can see that the Catholic mindset of I need to abandon myself to whatever the Catholic Church says and I need to grow in holiness have kind of stayed firm in the sense that they haven't given up really any of their old values. And especially they haven't given up some of the smaller values that we don't tend to remember quite as much. So for example, it used to be commonplace throughout the entire world, not just in America, but throughout the entire world, that the man was the head of the family. He was the boss. Whatever he said went, pretty much. As long as he wasn't like a drunkard abusing his wife and children or something like that, he was the boss. And most traditional Catholics today know that, though there is some doubt that that's really enforced quite the way that it should be. I think Father Ripperger said that the vast majority of traditional Catholic marriages is probably matriarchies, not patriarchies, unfortunately. But at least the traditional Catholics do acknowledge that the men should be the head of the family. Leading off of that, there's also the bit about women not being able to vote, not because the women are second-class citizens or whatever, but because, generally speaking, only land-owning married men over the age of 21 were allowed to vote, because they were linked in, they were tied to their community by having to own the land, they were the head of their families, and then they cast a vote on behalf of their family. So the individual is not the building block of society, the family was the building block of society. Traditional Catholics still know that, the Protestants don't. Leading off of this, you also have the bit about the wearing of skirts, for example. So traditional Catholics have always believed and taught that women should wear skirts. I'm not going to get into too deep on that as to why here specifically, because that could be almost an entire video in and of itself. But generally speaking, if you ask many traditional Catholics, should women wear skirts and not wear pants or anything like that, just skirts or dresses for the women, the traditional Catholics will say yes, the women should not wear pants. Tell a Protestant that women shouldn't wear pants, and they'll be absolutely horrified. Now, 200 years ago, if you asked a Protestant, should women never wear pants, the Protestant would have said, oh, yes, of course, the women should never wear pants. But because of the fact that the Protestants get to personally interpret things however they want or desire, the Protestants have changed their views on that subject over time, whereas the traditional Catholics haven't. So in our modern day society where everybody believes, for example, that women wearing pants is A-OK, the traditional Catholics have to stick to what the Catholic Church has said, regardless of how they personally feel about the matter, whereas the Protestants get to bend or twist the rules based on how they personally feel now in the 20th century, and basically on whatever public opinion is. And what we can also see next up in a modern society where the Protestant conservative mindset has changed is that the conservatives, they never really take any specific action to change anything themselves or to try to fix any problems that occur. I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said that the job of progressives is making mistakes in the world, and then the conservatives' job is just stopping the mistakes from being corrected. So, the liberals will do something evil, and then the conservatives won't do a single thing to correct what the progressives did. And, throughout most of my life, I actually thought that the conservatives were the good guys. In America, it's usually assumed that you're either a conservative, quote-unquote, or a liberal, quote-unquote. And if you're a conservative, then you're a good guy. And if you're a liberal, then you're a bad guy. But something that's really kind of come across is that, to me, is that the conservatives, they never really want to do anything that will enact change or fix change. And I'll give you two concrete examples of that. So in 2013, Edward Snowden revealed that Americans' cell phones, laptops, and so on and so forth were all being spied on by the NSA, by the government. So the government was quite literally just spying on everything that everyone was doing on their computer. So if you sent a text to your best friend, the government was recording that. If you were having a phone call with somebody, the government was logging that on your cell phone. If you browse something on the internet, the government was logging every single search that you made on your computer. Now, naturally, the conservatives, hating big government and whatnot, they whined and cried about that one for days, which was correct. The government was overstepping its bounds. Now, what the conservatives did not do is actually look for alternatives. Now, if somebody is spying on you on your computer using using Windows or Mac, you have alternatives, because that's specifically how the government was spying on people, where they were using the Windows operating systems and the Mac OS operating systems. Now, when I heard about the government spying on people, being the go-getter kind of person that I was, I said, okay, what are the alternatives? And I found out that there is an alternative operating system you can use for your computer called Linux. So I was like, all right, Linux it is then. And there was a learning curve to it, but I eventually managed to get that installed on my computer, and I fixed that problem. Now, when everybody else heard that the government was spying on their computer, by everybody else I mean all the conservatives I knew, they all said, oh, wow, that's too bad. And then they did absolutely nothing to fix it. And that's kind of the problem that the conservative mindset has. And I think that actually links back to religion in some kind of obscure way. Because the Catholic mindset, remember, is how can I fix this thing? How can I go here? In terms of holiness, it's how can I grab and achieve holiness? And in terms of the rules, it's how can I do whatever it takes to do good no matter what the cost is? Now, the Protestant's mindset is Jesus already saved me, so I'm taken care of and I don't have to do anything. And it's also, I couldn't do anything even if I wanted to, because it's beyond me. And I'm kind of starting to see this even in small ways throughout the society. When the government does something that's evil, for example, the traditional Catholics will often try to find small ways that they have of trying to kind of fight back or push back against the government, whereas the conservatives will loudly complain about it, but they won't actually do anything. The same thing, and the second example I'm going to give, in addition to the cell phone incident, for those of you who are saying, oh no, the conservatives do fight, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to edit that out. I said the 2020 sickness thing, but YouTube always likes to flag this video, so I'm just going to refer to it as CV from now on. So when the CV sickness came out in 2020, the government said, okay, all of the churches are getting shut down. Now, none of you are allowed to go to church. Now, I will admit that there were some exceptions where the Protestants kind of pushed back on that. Now, what happened here, though, almost universally, was all of the Protestant churches immediately shut down. Now, they complained about the government shutting down. The conservatives complained loudly about the government shutting their churches down, but they didn't actually do anything about it. They'd say, oh, it's such a gross overreach of our rights, blah, 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 and then they'd immediately put on their mask and comply. Now, when the traditional Catholics were told, oh, yeah, you're not going to be going to Mass anymore because the government said that it's happened, basically what happened is all of the traditional Catholic priests, at least in the Society of St. Pius X, basically laughed and said, watch us. And then they all had different ways of getting around it. Now, what some of them did was they would work with the local sheriff's office or fairground, and they'd have, say, everybody show up in a field and they'd have mass in cars, but they'd still go around and distribute communion and whatnot. Maybe they'd have confession lines where the priest sat outside like 6 feet away, so it was like technically compliant, but they'd still have confessions and whatnot. But basically what happened is the SSPX priests, especially just traditional priests in general, a lot of them, would find ways to get around the rules. Some of the chapels flat out refused to shut down, and they would even sue the local government at times. Some of them had underground masses. But the bottom line was that the traditional Catholics basically just flat out refused to comply with the government in this case. Why was that? Well, one, because God said, according to the traditional Catholic rules, that you got to go to Mass on Sunday. There's no personal interpretation about it. You don't get to interpret the rules in the way that you best see fit. You just have to do whatever the rules say. So if God says you're going to Mass on Sunday, then you're going to Mass on Sunday. And the second one was, remember, Catholics are supposed to be go-getters when it comes to achieving holiness. So if something is thrown up, there's some kind of obstacle that presents itself in achieving holiness, the Catholics have to find some way to either fight through it, over it, around it, under it, whatever it takes to get there. So if the government says, yeah, you're not getting to Mass on Sunday, the Catholics don't get to give up and say, oh, well, we tried, we did our best. No, the Catholics have to fight and find some way around that. Now, the Protestant mindset, again, when the Protestants had some roadblock thrown up in their ways, one, they didn't have some unified system of rules that they had to obey no matter what and get to church on Sunday, so they just kind of shrugged and said, oh, well, the government said we can't, so that's that. And the second thing was that the Protestants are not used to being go-getters. They're not used to fighting their way around or under or through different obstacles that present themselves, so they pretty much just gave up at the punch. Again, I understand that there are some exceptions to that. For example, the conciliar Catholics, the Novus Ordo Catholics, the New Order Catholics, they pretty much just did the exact same thing that the Protestants did. But then again, the New Order Catholics and Protestants are basically one and the same. The New Order Mass is pretty much just a Protestant prayer service anyway, so there's really no difference between the two. And I will admit that there were some Protestants that did fight back, definitely during COVID and whatnot. There were some, I think, Protestant ministers or reverends or whatever they were called that were hauled away because they kept their churches open. So there were definitely some exceptions to that rule. Again, we are talking about quite literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people here, so there are definitely going to be many, many exceptions. I know that I didn't get a cover, and I do know that many of the Protestants are definitely trying to find ways to gain holiness, quote unquote, and they are definitely holding themselves strictly to some rules. I guess you could say even that the Amish technically do that as well, because they make all their women wear skirts, and they try to make the men the head of the family, though the Amish do get quite a few things wrong, and there are some problems in some of the Amish communities, so there definitely are exceptions, but by and large, the traditional Catholic mindset of holding yourself fast to the Catholic Church's rules no matter what, and cleverly finding your way around any obstacles that present themselves, is generally going to do far better when it comes to fighting against government tyranny, or whatever you want to call it, in this new crazy world that we're living in, full of communists and Freemasons who run the show. Whereas the conservative mindset is more generally just along the lines of, vote harder. And that's something you can kind of see in elections too, is that the conservatives always hope and pray that whatever great new politician gets into office is going to save them and fix all their problems, whereas the traditionalists just kind of casually vote, almost reluctantly. They don't even like voting because they acknowledge the fact that most of the politicians are never going to do anything to help them, and then they'll go straight back to trying to find ways to advance their own causes without having to rely on the government. So yeah, that's it.